So, this is how I spent my week. Now, I wonder how they would react if I preached the whole sermon this way. I'm guessing that might be a distraction to you, but I'll tell you what, your kids loved it. Someone said, yeah, there you go, that's fine. It was like some grand secret today as the kids were coming up and they were going, "It's you, Dr. D." And I went, "Yeah, how'd you know? That was great." But of course, the big question for everybody was, how was I going to do my hair this week? Because what I decided as the mad scientist of the Mythbusters Vacation Bible School, that was a great opportunity. You know, it was a beautiful thing. And I said this several times to you. You know, it's great as a church plant, couple years old, that we can pull off an amazing vacation Bible school like we did, and I wasn't a bit of any of the planning. They just said, you come, blow up a few things, wear a weird costume, do your hair funny, and that's all I did. It was awesome. What a blessing. But yeah, so Monday, I had an afro thing going on, which is not that hard for me to create out of this mop. So it was just about 2 minutes, and it was there. And then Tuesday, had an awesome comb over. It was beautiful. Yeah, I think that was a favorite. I started about here and glued hair across my forehead. It was great. And then Wednesday, let's see, I think was the faux hawk, right? And then Thursday, what was Thursday? Oh, yeah, how could I forget? Pigtails and a fountain on the top of my head. And people went, "Wow, your hair's longer than I thought." Yeah, you got to cover up this mess. That's what. And then Friday was just all straight down. It was fun. The kids loved it. I loved it. It was a wonderful thing. You know, we had about 80 kids for Vacation Bible School. And but it was more than that. You know, what I think is amazing, too, is we had about 40 volunteers, and a lot of them were guys. That's an amazing thing. That usually doesn't happen. And so it was totally awesome. And then you had one crazy former scientist turned pastor that got to dress up weird and blow some stuff up. There is a couple of spots on the concrete that I ruined, but that's how it goes. So that's how we roll around here. We can ruin concrete, and guess what? It doesn't matter. We had a great time, and I think lives were changed forever. And that's just how it goes. It's an amazing thing to me to see all the work that goes into those things. And so let's recognize those that really participated, okay? So if you were a part of that planning, you were here, you were helping out in any way, stand up, because we want to celebrate God that worked through you, okay? Let's do that. That's good. The other amazing thing, and I don't know whose idea it was, but it was a beautiful idea, was to have the kids compete by bringing food for the hungry. And what you see here are hundreds of cans of food that we're going to be able to feed lots of families in our community, and that's an amazing thing. Yeah. So I'll tell you from my perspective, from a pastoral perspective, seeing what I saw at Vacation Bible School, which, again, I have been in a few Vacation Bible Schools. It was the best one I've ever seen. It was so wonderful. But watching and being a part of it, just even a small piece to come in and be the crazy science guy that the kids could give a high five to and laugh at, and the volunteers laughed at me too, which is all good. I can take it. But just to be a small part of it, you know, it made me so excited about what God's doing in our youth ministry, in our children's ministry, and as we get ready to launch Awana, I'm so excited to see what's happening. There is no question that God is on the move and that lives are being changed, and not just in kids' lives, but in their parents' lives, and the adults' lives, and the lives of those who have volunteered, because that's how it goes. When you're open to allow God to work, that's what it is. And so people have asked me, you know, well, why do you spend so much time and all those resources? Or maybe even a question today, because I felt like God intended me to change my message today based on what I saw for Vacation Bible School. And many, even some pastor friends at times, will ask, why invest all that time and all those resources and all that energy in the kids? Because guess what? It's not just entertainment. There's a lot that goes on. Why do that? And let me answer, at least give you part of the answer. Part of the answer is this, that your children and my children, and the children of the people sitting next to you, all the children in classes, these children are just as important, just as loved, and just in need of investment in our time and our energy and our hearts as you are. They are just as important. So many times, so many churches, they get this idea, and whether they say it or not, you can get a feel for it, I think. Because I've been in churches, not as a pastor, but years ago, I've been in churches where kids were seen as one of those, it's good that we see them every now and then, but we don't want to hear them. As long as they're quiet and they keep their mouths shut, we're in good shape. And that kids' class is to get the kids to shut up, give them some Play-Doh and some animal crackers, and as long as they stay quiet so those of us in here can pay attention, we're all good. Guess what? That is way, way broken. That is not the right mindset. We want to invest all that we have in these children because we want our kids. I want my kids. I want your kids. I want the kids all in that room. I want the kids that you know, the next door neighbors that you have, their kids, I want them in heaven. And it doesn't happen on accident. We want to teach them and love them and show you what it's like to follow, show them what it's like to follow God. I got a video I was totally floored by. It actually made me just sit and weep. It was on Facebook that one of the ladies here, Amanda Wilbur, she posted, she caught her little itty-bitty little girl, Allie, in the car, and she had her on video, and she wanted to sing Spencer songs, and she said, I love Spencer, and she's like 2, and she said, I love Spencer, I love God, I love Jesus, and I went, oh, please God, let that be what we're teaching these children. It's not about me, but to say that the church is good. It's good to have a loving pastor that loves them as much as he loves you, and I do love you, and that they find that love from God. You're on the right track, and that is the right DNA. And I'm so excited and so proud to be a part of a community of people that really believe that too, and that we can invest in those children and plant those seeds of faith and hope, and that our teachers, as they teach, they grow in the knowledge of who God is. Jennifer reminds me often, my wife, she reminds me often, she'll say, don't forget where you started, Pastor. And that is when I was about 20 and we were first married and I wasn't a Christian. And she was, and she would invite me to come with her to teach class on Wednesday nights to the little itty-bitty kids. And I didn't want to go to church. I thought church was stupid, and especially the pastor guy that talked all the time. Here we are, I know. It's all good. 20 years ago is a long time. And I would go with her kind of begrudgingly, but it was better than to listen to all those people saying and that dude talk all the time. So Wednesday night was sort of a compromise, and she would teach like the 3, 4, 5-year-old kids, and we'd get done at the end, and I'd go, I didn't know that story was in the Bible. That was interesting. What was she doing all the while? She was teaching me by helping to teach the kids. We all got to start somewhere. It's a good place to start. And so, others have asked, though, why I was involved, and some people have been surprised. And again, this isn't about me, but I'll tell you, I didn't have time for VBS this week. I just didn't. But it was so important to me to say that I'm willing to invest my time in our kids, not just expect other people to do it. And that, I hope, is an issue of example. One of these Sundays, you're going to show up, and I'm not going to be preaching. You know why? Because I'm going to take a turn teaching the kids' class. Because it is not beneath me either, because they are important. We've got to invest our time and our energy in those children as well. They are our legacy. As the kids were filing out for the last time on Friday, Jennifer and I were standing there and getting some high fives of the kids, and she said, that is our future church right there. And I said, you're right. Generations to come will grow in their faith, and they will learn who Christ is because of what we do in times like that. And it might drive you nuts to hear them singing upstairs. If you hear a little bit of it, it makes me smile. That is not a distraction. That is a beautiful sound to hear children with that simple, trusting faith to sing songs of joy about God. May it never, ever cease. May not one of those children be lost to the craziness of our culture. Matthew 21, 15 through 16 says, but when the chief priests and the scribes saw the wonderful things that Jesus was doing, and the children were crying out in the temple, Hosanna to the Son of David. Notice it's the children who are singing this. The children know these things sometimes long before the adults do. As we grow older, our skulls get more and more thick, don't they? And it's sometimes we just don't see what's right in front of us. But children, they see it. They see it and they believe so easy. Don't you wish you still had that kind of faith sometimes? You see it and it's so easy to believe. And so these religious leaders, they go, these children are crying out in the temple, or actually Jesus says, they're crying out in the temple, Hosanna to the Son of David. They were indignant and they said to Jesus, do you hear what these kids, let's insert the word brats. That was definitely the flavor of that time. Do you hear what these brats are saying, Jesus? Do you hear what they're saying? And Jesus said to them, yes. Have you never read Psalm 8:2? He didn't say it that way, but he quotes it. Have you never read, you religious leaders, you guys who know all this stuff, the religious leaders who do all the right things, but your heart is not there? Your heart is hard. You don't really love God, but you do all the right check boxes. Have you never read Psalm 8:2, that out of the mouths of infants and nursing babies you have prepared praise? And children know. It's built in to know. Jesus said, let the little children come to me. Do not hinder them, for such is the kingdom of heaven. In Matthew 19:14, what was going on? Well, all the children wanted to flock to Jesus. Why? It's that simple, trusting faith. You know when goodness comes your way. And children, again, they're not harmed and hampered by all the stuff that we see. We look at someone and we go, they might actually be a serial killer. They have that look in their eye. We come up with, was that not funny to you? It was way funnier in my head. But, we look at people. And we make those instant judgments, but children are so easy, and that can be dangerous, I know, but they see Jesus, and they know there's something there. They know there's something good. There's something with authority and presence and love and power, and the children are flocking to Jesus, and the disciples are like, no, you stupid kids, get away. We don't want to bother the teacher. No, you got to stay away, because in that culture, that would have been normal. And the children didn't have a place there. They were to not even be seen, much less heard. They needed to get out of the way. The big boys were talking. And Jesus says, do not hinder them. This is what it's all about. The heart of a child, which, by the way, must be won by you as parents. The heart of a child is so precious and so tuned into God, it does not take much to let them see who Jesus really is. And Jesus says, do not hinder them to come. This is what the kingdom of heaven is about. Not about you have to be itty-bitty, but you have to have that simple, trusting faith like a child. Matthew 18:3 says, truly I say to you, this is Jesus, unless you turn and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. What a powerful message, so simple, that says that if you get so hung up and worried about what people think. Do children worry about, little kids, do they worry what people think? When they were up here singing and just full of joy, I wish we started every Sunday that way. But what would make it better is if y'all and me, we weren't worried about what the dude next to us was thinking either. And we just could worship and have joy in that moment. And I could sing whether I can sing or not, because God doesn't worry a bit, I am convinced, about with the tone of your voice or whether you're sharp or flat. He is listening to your heart. And so it does not matter what your neighbor thinks about your singing voice, in front, behind, whatever. Raise your hands if you want or not. It doesn't matter. It's an issue and condition of the heart always. And they don't worry about it, and neither should we. And Jesus says, unless you turn, become like one of these children, that simple, trusting faith, you will not see the kingdom of heaven. It's not a fire and brimstone message. It's a message that says sometimes we as adults, we need to stop being so smart and just trust and just see that Jesus really is who he said he was, and he was amazing. And so what we tried to do, and I say we very loosely, I really didn't have much to do with it. We had amazing leaders, and I'm not going to begin to name them because I would assuredly leave some out. But there were so many, and the idea was with these kids this week, we want to do certain things, and that is one of them. We wanted to bust some myths that come up in our culture, and we wanted to overcome those. You know, for me, when I think about children's ministry, I think of it as many things. One of those things is I think that children's ministry is like a vaccine. Now, a vaccine, now coming from a former science guy, here's a simple definition of a vaccine, okay? A vaccine is a little bit of the real thing, but in a controlled environment. That way it doesn't get out of control. But the intention of that little bit of a real thing in a controlled environment is so the body learns how to fight it while it's controlled. And that way when it comes in contact with the real thing, the bad thing, the body already knows how to deal with it. Does that make sense? That's what a vaccine does. I think children's ministry is so much of that we teach the children in a controlled environment a little bit. We give them a little bit. Why not a lot? Because they're itty-bitty. They're little kids. We give them a little piece. We plant a little seed of hope, a little seed of faith, a little seed of love. We plant a little bit of how to break down the myths that our culture has used to lie to our children and lie to you. And we overcome them, a little vaccine, so that when they aren't with us, which doesn't happen when they turn 18, it happens when they go to school. It happens when they go around anywhere. It could happen anywhere as they go out into the world, watch TV, play a video game, whatever it is, that they have been taught, and that those seeds of hope and faith and love and truth, which is something our society does not value anymore, those things planted in their hearts, when they come in contact with things that try and lead them astray, they'll know. They'll know what's right. And so that's part of what good children's ministry does. It breaks down those barriers and it plants those seeds. And it is important for them, but guess what? It is just as important for you too. And as I thought about it this week, I thought, you know, a lot of people that come into this room, they don't worry about these things. There are many myths that you have debunked in your own mind, and that's good. But let me tell you, they're still important to talk about. Because if you want to teach your children and your neighbor's children or my children, and we teach each other's children, and even in your own life, we have to be purposeful about those things and make sure that we're not believing lies, because there are lies everywhere, everywhere. By false teachers, by bad teaching, by confusion. And surely you have heard people say, you know, I don't really believe that God would allow whatever. Or I like to believe in a God that would... Has anyone ever heard anyone say that? I'm sure people in this room have said it. I have said it in the past. But when we do those things, it is nothing more than idolatry. We're creating our own little God of who we want God to be, and we're just not given that right. So the reality is we need to find this real God. But the good news is in Jeremiah 29:13, it says on the back of these shirts, but here's basically what it says. If you search for me wholeheartedly, you will find me. That doesn't say if you search for me a little bit, you'll find me. It doesn't say if you search for me kind of like, okay, God, I'll give you a moment. If you'll talk, I'll pay attention. None of that stuff. That's not wholeheartedly. But if you search for me with all of you, all of your heart, you will find me. And if you will help other people search, and they'll fall in love with God, they will see who He is, and it will change everything. It will change everything. And so for you, I want to take a few minutes and debunk some myths that we debunked this week with a bunch of kids. Now, first service, I didn't get very far, so we'll see what happens. Is that fair? We'll get as far as we can get without ruining your lunch, you know? So the first myth then is this. And this is a myth that we'll try it. Do we have enough voices in here? Okay, here we go. We'll try this. Here's the first myth. Jesus never struggled. Is that true? Jesus never struggled? No. There we go. So we did that a lot with the kids this week. It was fun. Jesus never struggled is a myth. So many people believe, well, no, if Jesus was who He said He was, if He was really God, He would never have struggled. Here's the reality. Jesus was 100% God, but also 100% man. Can I comprehend it fully? No. Is that okay? Yes. You know why? Because God is a mystery to us to a certain degree, and that's a good thing. If you have God all figured out, you don't need him. And so there's some mystery in that to understand that fully. But we see that Jesus did struggle in this world. And we see it especially in the Synoptic Gospels. Now, the Synoptics, let me just teach you a little background. The Synoptics are the first three books in the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. That word synoptic comes from the Greek, and S-Y-N is together. And then optic is see. We see them together. Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they're seen together. They tell basically the same story, but from different perspectives, written to different groups. But we can see very clearly it's the same type of story that's going on. John is a gospel, but it's written a different way. It's not a different story. It's just a different perspective. So all those synoptic gospels seen together, we see very clearly that Jesus was tested. He was tempted just like we are. He had all the same challenges, but the difference in Jesus is he never sinned. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And so we see in Hebrews chapter 2, verse 18, this passage says, since he himself has gone through suffering and testing. Stop there. What is the true statement? Jesus did deal with suffering. Now, ultimately, the answer to that is why? If you're God in the flesh, why go through all of that? Here's why. The passage continues, and we'll see another one, and that is, he goes through it so you know that he has. He goes through it so that he can be a comfort to you, although an omniscient God would know all about it. He didn't have to experience it as an omniscient God. He would know how we feel. He created us. He knows everything about how we think and feel, but he goes through it, and therefore he is able to help us when we're being tested, which is the conclusion of Hebrews 2:18. That yes, he was tested, he was suffering, he was beaten and bruised and all those things. Why? So that you know that he's been there in those shoes of yours. Isn't that what we all want to know? Have you walked in my shoes? Isn't that something that we typically say when we're going through a trial? We find the most comfort in what? In someone who has gone through what we're going through. Is that true? That's a very biblical passage. 2 Corinthians 1, 3, and 4 talks about it. That God is the God of comfort, who comforts us in our trials so that we can comfort others with the same comfort that God gave us. It is purposeful. It's not accident. Jesus goes through that suffering and testing so that he can be a comfort to us, so that we know Jesus has been in my shoes. Jesus did struggle. Now, we see other places that I love. We see that Jesus actually got angry from time to time. Now, I don't know about you. Some people, that may mess up your theology. For me, it makes it stronger. I love the fact that Jesus got angry. And we see that in different places. Now, there's a difference in Jesus getting angry, and that is he doesn't sin, which is usually what's so different between him and me. When I get angry, it is easy to spiral out of control and to say things that I don't mean, to say nasty things and do things. Anybody else in that boat? 4 of you? All right, that's awesome. So the rest of you take a quick nap. I got to talk for about 5 more minutes. So the rest of us that get angry and sin. And we say stupid, hurtful, nasty things. Or in some cases, do stupid, hurtful, nasty things. There was a time in my life, my natural inclination is a fuse that's about this long. And there was a time that if you would light my fuse, I was in your face challenging you to take it outside. I know that surprises you. I'll tell a tattle on myself. Should I? Yes. Okay. Jennifer and I were dating. This is a dumb story about a dumb young man. This is why I want to teach your boys how to love God and be angry, but don't sin. And so we were lived in Kansas City. We're in one of the worst parts of town because it's where I went to school. Jennifer was in the passenger side. We were at McDonald's. We'd paid at the first window. We were waiting at the second window, and the car behind us rear-ended us in the drive-thru. And I looked in the rearview mirror, and the 4 guys in the car were laughing. And I got out of the car, walked up, and challenged them to get out to show them what they were going to get. Now, there is nothing manly about that. That is just pure, unadulterated, 100% stupid. It's curable, which is good. Here we are. Haven't done that in years. Aren't you glad? We do these things, but we often sin in our anger, which is so different than Jesus. He did not sin in any of that. Ephesians 4:26 makes it very clear. But you know, there's also another part of Jesus where he cried. At Lazarus' tomb, we see it in John chapter 11, verses 28 through 36, that when Jesus shows up to the tomb, Jesus cries. Theologians for years have asked, why did Jesus cry? I don't quite get it. I don't know. Sometimes you get too smart and you lose touch with our own reality and how life goes. Some will say, well, maybe Jesus cried because of the lack of faith of people that were there and were saying, Jesus, why weren't you here? He could have saved him. Or others, maybe he was just distraught over one thing or another. I think it was pretty clear as you read that passage. I don't think it leaves any room for confusion whatsoever. Jesus sees them crying and he cries. We talked about mirror neurons a few weeks ago, a nice nerdy science topic, that there's something built into us and we mirror the emotions that we see in front of us often. But it is genuine that Jesus was sad, even knowing that he could raise Lazarus from the dead and did, that it still hurts to see someone go. I love it that we worship and serve a God who can weep. Man, what a different life it would be if we didn't. And what's so sad is there's so many theologies out there that say that God is totally emotional, no emotions whatsoever. But it is just the worst theology ever. If you read through the Bible, you see an emotional God. You see that he can be angry and not sin. You see that his heart is broken, and you see these kinds of emotions. But you also see joy. Like there is no greater joy in heaven than when someone that's lost comes and is found. That's a beautiful thing. Where do these emotions come from in us? They come from being created in the image of a God who does that. However, unlike us, God is not wrecked by his emotions. We can become wrecked by our emotions, can't we? Is that true? Like something that doesn't go our way can totally wreck us. God is not wrecked by emotion. God is 100% in control all the time in absolute perfection. There is none of that. He is not swayed here and there like we are by every momentary challenge. And, whoa, I'm happy now because things are going my way. Or, ooh, I'm mad now because I'm not happy with how something turned out. We are wrecked that way because we are incomplete, sinful human beings. But God in his perfection can still have emotion without being wrecked and controlled by it. But we see this over and over with Jesus. And with Jesus, people failed him constantly. People failed him. They called him names. Even his family at one point thought he was crazy. His earthly family. He was disrespected and beaten in all sorts of manners. Jesus had a challenging human existence. And that's good because we see who he really is, and Jesus understands our struggles. In Hebrews chapter 4, verses 14 and 15, it says, "Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession. For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who has been tempted in all things as we are, yet without sin." And I got to finish with verse 16 because it says, "Therefore, let us draw near with confidence to the throne of grace so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in a time of need." We have a Jesus who dealt with all the junk we deal with. That should give us hope and peace and joy that he's been there and he can comfort us through it. And that what are we called to do then? In that we draw near, not further away, which is usually what happens. Am I right? We go through some challenge, something doesn't go our way. We often push back. But in fact, the truth is we need to draw near. And just like this passage, Jeremiah 29:13, if you search for me wholeheartedly, that means not ebb and flow, not up and down, good times, but in the bad times too. If you look for me wholeheartedly, you will find me. Jesus dealt with trials, and we're promised that we will too. But we have a Jesus, a God in the flesh, a God who lives now, that is there rooting for us and offering that comfort. The second myth that we debunked with the kiddos, which is probably one of my favorites, was the myth that Jesus was weak. Was Jesus weak? I love Vacation Bible School. I wish we just did that all the time. That'd be so fun. Wouldn't it be nice? No, Jesus wasn't weak. I need you to close your eyes for just a second. I promise I won't spit on you. You're sitting way too far away. I want you just to picture Jesus in your mind's eye for a moment, whatever that looks like to you. Now let me ask you this question. Does Jesus look more like Mother Teresa or William Wallace in Braveheart? All right, now open your eyes. It's a good question. We've been taught a certain way about Jesus, and I think, unfortunately, we've missed the boat. We've seen a Jesus that he is just not. We see a powerful Jesus. We see one that is not weak. But at the same time, we see a Jesus who is absolutely perfect in his ability to be the right emotions at the right time. And so, for instance, you see over in Matthew chapter 8, verse 3, this is the story about the leper who comes to Jesus. In Matthew chapter 8, you see the leper who comes. Well, let's just read it. Let's turn to Matthew. Matthew chapter 8. If you've got your Bibles, we'll do that. Matthew chapter 8. When Jesus came down from the mountain, large crowds followed him, and a leper came to him and bowed down before Jesus and said, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." And Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him. The people around would have gasped. They would have freaked out, because you don't touch lepers. You don't touch them. They're the ones that walk around going, unclean, unclean. You don't touch these people. And Jesus reaches out and he touches him and he says, "I'm willing, be cleansed." And immediately his leprosy was cleared, was cleansed. It was cleaned up. That amazes me, that Jesus touches the untouchables. Is that a message, do you think, for the church? Or is that just, it's good for Jesus, but not for me? It's got to be a message somewhere that resonates at some point, that Jesus touched the untouchables. He wasn't afraid. He had power over all of that. But he wasn't afraid at all. He touched the guy that was untouchable. That shows a tender, compassionate heart. He very easily could have said, "Dude, you are nasty. You are gross. I'm not about to touch you. You are sick and nasty because you've done terrible things. Get out of my sight." What a shame it would be if that's what our God was like, but it's not. This is a tender, compassionate God in the flesh, Jesus Christ, who touches the leper. I don't want to belabor the point, but you cannot miss it. You also can't miss it, that the fact that right after this story with the centurion servant, he doesn't have to touch him to heal him. He just has to speak the word and it's healed. The servant is healed. What does that tell us? It tells us that Jesus did not have to touch the leper to heal him. Jesus could have said, "Fine, be cleansed," and be done with it. But he touches him on purpose, because I bet you that guy had not been touched in years and years and years. No physical contact. But Jesus touches him. Tender and compassionate. But Jesus at the same time can go and pick a fight. That's the William Wallace in there, right? That favorite line in Braveheart where they're asking him what he's about to do. And he says, "I'm going to go pick a fight." And we see that with Jesus. He goes and picks some fights. But it's not with the lepers. Who is it with? It's the religious elite who have no heart for God, but they have all the right stuff in line. They want to do it exactly the right way, check those boxes off, but it's not out of a love for God. It is out of a duty, it's out of an expectation, and then heaping these burdens on all the people to follow it just like this. Jesus goes and picks some fights. He goes in and he does these amazing things, and then when they say, "If you do that again, you're in trouble," okay, and he goes and does it. This is a Jesus who picks a fight. Is this a wimpy, weak Jesus? No, we miss it so much. We see over in Luke chapter 4, if you look there. I love this in Luke chapter 4. You just got to see it for a minute. Luke chapter 4. So right before this, we see Jesus is baptized. Now, I think it's important that this is in there in this way. But Jesus is baptized, and often after a great spiritual experience, like after a baptism, or after a women's conference, or a men's boot camp, or after Vacation Bible School, it is so easy to be beat up. So easy. No different here. Jesus is baptized, and then the temptation is ready right around the corner. But Jesus fasts for 40 days. And so many people have asked, well, why does Jesus fast for 40 days? And I've heard people say, probably because since he's God in the flesh, he has to be totally depleted. That way he's not working on his own divinity. He's so weak that he's more like us. I'll tell you the truth. I used to think that's true. I don't think so. The Bible doesn't really define it for us. Here's what makes more sense to me of why Jesus fasts for 40 days. It's because he knows he's about to go into battle. He knows what's going to come up. He knows the devil is going to come after him. And the devil's going to come after him with this lust for the flesh, or lust of the eyes, or the temptation of pride, which are the three things that the devil hits him with, and he combats them all with Scripture. Instead, when Jesus knows he's about to go into battle, he wants to tap into the absolute and complete power, and that is into God. And so he fasts. He gives up the thing that we love the most sometimes, that sometimes distracts us, and he gets rid of the distraction so he can 100% connect with the Father and have the power that's available through him. That's why I'm sure, in my mind anyway, again, it doesn't say it. I could be wrong, but I don't think so. He taps into the ultimate power, that same power that says, let there be light. And Jesus is tapping in. Of course, Jesus is creator, but he taps into that ultimate power of the Father to be able to withstand the battles of the temptation that are coming his way. Now, we see in other places, answering this question, was Jesus weak? Look at my favorite place in John chapter 2. And Jesus goes into the temple and he cleans house. He throws the temple tables over with the money changers. At some point he goes back and he braids a whip and he comes and he gets rid of all the animals. But again, we see that tender side when it comes to the doves that are in the cages. He doesn't toss the doves out of the way. Why? They would die. He tells them, hey, you, take these doves out of here, but I'm going to clean some house. Is this Mother Teresa? This is more William Wallace, who comes in. Could a 90-pound weakling come and clear the temple of all the animals, the stampede that would have occurred? It would have been like shouting fire in a busy movie theater. This is not some wimpy Jesus. This is powerful that can come in and clean house. Or you look over when Jesus is taken in the Garden of Gethsemane. He goes through that and the soldiers come to get him. And Jesus asks them, why are you here? Who are you looking for? And they say, we're looking for Jesus of Nazareth. And Jesus says, I am he. And the sound of his voice knocks the people to the ground. Why? Because if you've ever been curious of whether or not Jesus really claimed to be God, this is one of many places that he makes it abundantly clear. It goes all the way back to Exodus chapter 2, where Moses is asking God, when he's talking to God, people are going to kind of want to know what your name is. How should I describe him to you? Or what should I tell them? And it is, I am. That Yahweh, that Hayah in Hebrew, it is that where God gives his special name. This is who I am. I am. And Jesus here says, I am. And they fall to the ground. Now, if you're one of those soldiers, do you think your mind might be wandering now? This guy who just said, I am, and I fell to the ground out of the power of what comes out of Jesus. What an amazing thing. We see over and over through Scripture, like in Exodus and Jeremiah, that God is called a mighty warrior. Here's the truth. Jesus was not weak. Jesus was strong. He was powerful, despite what all the artwork that you have seen that presents a limited and ridiculous view and vision of who Jesus was. He was intense and awesome in every way. We're only going to get through 3 myths, so we've got one more. Let's hit it. The third myth is that Jesus' friends never mess up. I don't know if you've ever heard this. Maybe some of you have even said it at one time or another. Not everybody in the room believes, and that's okay. You're in the right place. Keep coming. Keep growing. Let God do what he wants to do. But many people have said, if you want to follow God, you got to be perfect. Now, sometimes what we hear is the opposite side, like, well, you people who follow God, you mess up all the time, so that's proof that you... No. We're going to mess up. Why? Because we're humans, and we do stupid things, like get out of the car at McDonald's. Although I wasn't a Christian at the time. We do stupid things like this. We're not going to represent God well all the time. We need to, but probably we're not going to, because we're flesh, and we make terrible mistakes. But many people will say, no, Jesus' friends never messed up. It's an interesting myth to put human beings on that kind of standard. But here's the reality. Jesus purposefully chose people who messed up. He just did. Now, first of all, if Jesus had set out to choose perfect people, how far would he have gotten? No further than the mirror. And so Jesus has no choice but to pick messed up people, but I think the messed up people that he chooses are interesting. Jesus picks ordinary and unlikely people. And that's not just Jesus. All the way back to the Old Testament, you get to Moses. Moses is a great example. Moses, and he identifies it himself, and he says, I am slow of speech, and you want me to go into Pharaoh's house and do what? You're crazy, God. Basically, is what Moses is saying. You don't know what you're doing. I can't talk clearly. I'm not articulate. I'm slow when I speak. And of course, I love what God says. Who made man's mouth? I know exactly what I am doing. Stupid. No, he doesn't say that. That's my brain. That's what I hear in there. I read it, it's like, dude, if you saw what I've seen, that kind of thing. But God says, I know exactly who I have picked. And Jesus does the same thing. He picks absolute losers. He does. And if you've ever wondered, am I too bad or too much of a loser or not good enough to be a disciple or follower, just please take a few minutes and read a little bit of these Gospels and see who he picked. And he picks fishermen, which didn't exactly have the greatest reputation in town. Fishermen weren't like the elite of the town. They didn't walk around and everybody's like, hey, good guy right there. Hey, I like to see you. Thanks for coming in. You stink bad, but hey, you're awesome, Or Matthew, the tax collector. Oh, that blows my mind. The tax collector was the worst guy in the city. Everyone hated him. His only friends would have been all the other worst people in the city. Prostitutes, the heathens, all that. And Jesus says, follow me. To those fishermen, follow me. I'll teach you how to catch people instead of fish. Follow me. Give up that tax booth. Come and follow. This is who Jesus calls. It's amazing to me. Or you look at Saul in Acts chapter 9, verses 1 through 19. See it even more. Everybody knows the story of Saul, I hope. If not, let me just tell you very quick that one of the ones that Jesus handpicks himself is the guy who was out killing Christians and persecuting the church. And if you've ever sat there and thought, I'm too bad to follow, that is not the message from God. So if you can take a guy who was out killing Christians and turn him into the super apostle to go out and withstand beatings and shipwrecks and being bitten by snakes and being stoned and left for dead and all that, to going and reaching a lost and broken generation, if Jesus can use him, he can use me, and he can use you too. This is important, that we don't get caught up in these myths. The last one I'll tell you about Jesus' friends is Peter. I love Peter. I so identify with that guy. Sticks his foot in his mouth constantly. It's like open mouth, insert foot is Peter's life. But of course, Peter's the dude that gets out of the boat while the other 11 are wetting themselves in the corner. Peter's awesome. I love Peter. He's going to be one of the first ones I make an appointment with in heaven. I want to hang out with Peter. I want to go, now just tell me, what was it like to walk on that water? I just want to know. Tell me about it. When you started to sink, did it happen all at once, or was it sort of slow, like, I want to know. I can't wait for that moment. Peter was great. He was stupid, but he was awesome. That's why I identify, I just love this guy. But you see that he says, I'm willing to go to death and be killed for you, Jesus. And Jesus says, oh, Peter, tell you what, before that rooster crows in the morning, you're going to deny me 3 times. But and guess what happens? And he does. But at the end of the story, Jesus restores him too. He says, Peter, do you love me? Yes. Feed my sheep. Peter, do you love me? He asks him 3 times, and Peter's heart's got to be broken. Why do you keep asking me? Yes, you know I do. But out of the 3 denials, he restores him all 3 times. So even Peter, who denies Jesus. Oh, and that's beautiful too. Remember the story where Jesus says, I am. Boom. Power of God. You see the opposite of that with Peter when they come up and go, aren't you one of his disciples? What does he say? I am not. Peter is very clearly the antithesis of who Jesus is, but Jesus still restores him. And then on the confession, when Jesus is asking this question, who do people say that I am? And they have all these answers. They're probably not quite sure. They've never seen anything like this. None of us have. And Peter has this confession. He says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus says, well done. Because flesh and bones have not revealed that to you. You've seen that from God himself. And then Jesus says, Petros Petra, which is on this rock, that's Peter, is Petros. It means pebble. On this Petros, on this Peter, on this rock, this pebble, the immovable rock will be established. That doesn't make Peter the first pope. It's based on Peter's confession that you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. On that confession, on that knowledge, that's the immovable rock. I will build my church. Everything we do is that Petra, the immovable rock, Christ. Jesus' friends messed up. Jesus never did, but he offered that love and that forgiveness. The truth is, Jesus forgives and he saves, and we wouldn't need a Messiah if we weren't a mess. And we are. But we need that redemption and that forgiveness, and we need that immovable rock. So I have a couple more. We'll save them for another time. A couple of other myths that we struggle with and deal with. Maybe next week. We'll see what God has to say about it. But a myth that says that Jesus is still dead or maybe he never really died, you've got to hear that. You need to come back. We'll see. Hopefully God will let us talk about it because there's so much good there. There's so much richness that you can know that that story is real, that Jesus really died and that he really rose again. But he died for you. He went through all of that for you. And that last myth that we need to debunk still is that Jesus is not a little God or a good teacher only, but he is God in the flesh. And so why is this important to us? Why do we need to know this? Why is it worth our time? It's not just a vacation Bible school lesson. It's a lesson for you. It's a lesson for me. It's a lesson for us. Why do we need to know it? It's because we are full of myths in our world. We are full of messages that are contrary to who God is. You know, a message like Jesus is the only way is totally politically incorrect, but that does not mean that it's false. It is a true statement. And so we have to know that these myths are all around us. These are going to be taught to your children and your children's children, and it probably will get worse. They're going to be taught to your neighbor's kids, my kids, and your kids, and you need to be prepared to train them in the way they ought to go. Because one vacation Bible school isn't going to be enough. Sunday school isn't enough. They need you to teach them. And they need you to invest in them and in their kids eventually. One of my prayers is, of course, that my children's 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 children will be in heaven. I want to leave that legacy of faith. But I also want to know that my children will teach someone else's children, and that those children will teach others, and that those seeds of faith and hope and love are planted everywhere. And that as my kids seek God with their whole heart, as they grow and they mature, they will find him, because it is a promise that they will. I want that for your kids too. But we've got to vaccinate them, we've got to train them, and that means we've got to be trained and taught as well. And so your kids know it. The question is, do you? Will you take the time to understand it and grow from there? And so where do we go from here? Well, I want this kind of childlike faith. I do. I want that in me every day. It's not an act. It's not a way to outwardly show something so people see, oh, that guy must really love God. He's excited. No, that's not what it's about. It has nothing to do with what other people think. When you worship, which this is worship right now, even before that music starts, this is worship. Worship is a moment-by-moment life choice that says, I'm going to live my life out that says God is worthy. It can be with music, but it doesn't have to be. And just like we can have music and it not be worship if it's not my heart. I want each moment to be living out that childlike faith that says, I know that I know that I know that God is real and that He is in this place right now, calling to you, yearning for your heart, offering forgiveness for whatever stupid things you have done, offering redemption and a clean slate. He offers that for you. And it's not just to wipe it clean, but then to build you anew and a new life full of hope and joy despite your circumstances. This is what God offers. And He offers it in community. We can do this together to strengthen one another, that when our arms are weak and we can't hold them up, someone is right there next to me to help me hold my arms up. To love me like Jesus would love me, to love you like Jesus would love you, to strengthen one another, to be that team, to grow together in all of those things is so important. Because salvation hangs in the balance for people in this room right now. Salvation hangs in the balance for thousands of people who live in this town, tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people, billions of people. Salvation hangs in the balance. Like I put out on Facebook yesterday, 22,000 kids die every day from starvation. What a world we live in, but there's still hope. There's still hope. The church needs to come alive. Say that we will do it. We'll stand in the gap. We'll be who He calls us to be. We'll feed that physical food that's needed, but spiritual food, so that people will have hope and joy and life and love. Teach your kids. Win your children's hearts. That's what they need. They need to be won. Win your children's hearts. And let that just be a place to start. Let them take that love to others, to their friends, to the neighbors. Let that be you. Invest. Spend that time. Teach a kids class. Get involved or whatever it is. But win the hearts of the children. I would be satisfied if every one of these little kids that were here, they called me Dr. D and did this or something for the rest of their time here. Even, boy, that'd be fun. Their teenagers go, I remember when. That's fine with me. I will be a fool for Christ if that's what it takes to win your children's hearts for God. Will you do it with me? It's so important because I love them as much as I love you, and that's saying something. Let's do this. Let's break these myths, break these barriers, and let's become the people God has called us to be. I love you. I'm thankful for you. I want to pray for you, and if you want me to pray for you individually, I'm just going to go off to the side while Dixie and Jordan lead one last song. If you want me to pray for you, I will. Be happy to. If you want to make a commitment to follow, this is a great time. But know that I am praying for you, for your heart, praying for your heart and for your kids. Serious work at hand, but it is a joyful work despite the challenges that come. Let's pray. God, I praise you for this moment in time. You ordained it and orchestrated it just right so that we could be in your presence right now. I thank you for what we saw this week in children's lives. The seeds of faith that were planted, may we never lose one. May we never lose the heart of a child to myths and lies that are in our world that we deal with every day. Let these seeds of faith that were planted, these seeds of hope and joy, that simple childlike faith, let it last a lifetime. Let it be something that draws them to you, and teach them as you teach us to seek you with all of our hearts so that they'll know you and find you and follow. And I pray that prayer not just for our children, but each one that can hear the sound of my voice. That each one here would truly seek you with that childlike faith, that simple trusting belief that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of David, the King, the one who died to set us free. Let each one know it, not just know about it, but to take it in and live each moment as if it's really true, because it is. Move in our hearts, move us, transform us, in Jesus' name.